So let's return then to that issue of migration control. Labour is dismissing Tory plans for an annual cap on visas, claiming Rishi Sunak has lost control of migration and that it's more than twice as high than when Britain was in the EU. But leader Keir Starmer stopped short of guaranteeing to cut numbers of immigrants if his party wins power in a month's time. Let's speak to Charlie Downs, content lead at the Centre for Migration Control. Good afternoon to you, Charlie.
Hi Ian, how's it going?
All good at this end. I'm listening to these two squabble on this one, and frankly, if I have to take an objective view, Labour's position, Tory's position, doesn't actually look that different.
This is what people have to understand, and more people are actually waking up to this fact, is that there really is no meaningful distinction between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. They are both they're composed of the same sorts of people with the same sorts of ideas about what this country should look like and the same sorts of ideas about what good governance looks like. Now, in terms of their positions on migration control, I agree with you. There's really no difference. The Conservative Party have talked the talk to a certain extent, not really. I mean, their messaging has still been very weak, but at the very least, they've been prepared to address the issue of migration, which even 5 years ago would have been surprising, to say the least. I mean, migration has long been a taboo topic in this country to talk about. But this election is the immigration election. All of the main parties are talking about it as the number one issue. The Conservative Party's solution, however, is just absolutely lacking. What they're saying is they're going to effectively outsource migration legislation to the Migration Advisory Committee, one of these Blairite era so-called independent watchdog organizations, which in reality are populated by left-wing activists. One such example is Madeleine Sumption, who sits on the Migration Advisory Committee, who has done work with the Paul Hamlyn Foundation, who is a openly pro-open borders charity that has received millions in taxpayers' money. So outsourcing migration policy to an organization like this, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out how exactly that's going to go. Now, Reform, on the other hand, have pledged net zero migration. And this is very interesting because the fact that they're adopting that language is ironic in a way, because obviously most people associate that term, net zero, with climate policy, which of course Reform have been very vocal against. But net zero, what that means in reality is, well, we have an outflow of about 500,000 people per year in this country. So what that means in reality is a gross of about 500,000 people a year, which I think by most people's standards may still be too high. But at the very least, this is the beginning of a move in the right direction that Reform are proposing here. It's certainly a hell of a lot better than anything the Tories and Labour are proposing.
The argument, of course, goes, Charlie, as you know, that's all well and good. We could subscribe to that and try and achieve that, but then we're going to sit back and go, right, we achieved it. Where's all the care workers? Where are all the butchers? Where are the carpenters, etc.? That seems to be the counter to this. What's the truth of that?
There's a couple of things to say on this. So first and foremost is this notion that we rely on immigration for certain essential services like the health service is simply a myth. Last year, half of the health and social care visas that were handed out went to the dependents of people who came to work for the NHS. So in reality, whilst we may have imported a great number of people who have gone to work for the NHS, they have brought with them people who will use the NHS. So in reality, the people who are coming to work there are just servicing people who they're bringing along. So there's no net benefit. Furthermore, organizations, we've already mentioned the Migration Advisory Committee. There is a vast and very complicated network of these sorts of organizations that have been set up, broadly speaking, over the last 30 years. Another such is the Office for Budget Responsibility. Now, the OBR has overstated the fiscal contributions of immigration by billions and billions of pounds. And this is not inconsequential because the OBR informs Treasury policy. So there's this, as I say, this vast tangle of quangos and so-called independent bodies that are backing up and essentially advocating for the kind of mass immigration that we've seen, and it's these organizations that are pushing and producing the arguments that we need immigration, otherwise our economy is going to collapse. It's simply not the case. I mean, go out into the streets and look around you. I mean, does it feel as though our economy is booming? It certainly doesn't for me. I'm 22 years old, and the prospects of me owning a house are, you know, very, very small. And yet I watch as the fields in which I played as a child are ploughed up and paved over to make way for these enormous housing developments. And it's certainly not going to be me that's going to be living in them, because the fact of the matter is we cannot keep pace with migration when it comes to house building. It's a disaster.
We will watch with interest. We will speak again as well. Charlie, thank you. Interesting stuff from Charlie Downs, content lead over there at the Centre for Migration Control.